What's up, guys? Welcome back to K.D.P Programming. This is part 7 of our SQL fundamentals, and in today's video I'll be walking you guys through an example of a foreign key, and I'll also be showing you guys what a composite key is. In the previous videos we did go through foreign keys and other constraints. If you haven't seen those videos, I'll put the link to those videos in the description box below. So without wasting any of your time, let's get straight into this. If you have been following the series, I believe you have seen this document before. This is our database file, and today we'll be creating our marks table and we'll be inserting all this data. So previously we created a few tables. If I go to my database and click on tables, these are the tables that we created. We have data types, examples, we have modules, and we have students. So today we are going to be creating a table that holds marks. So it's this table, and we'll be inserting this data. This is our marks table. So let me just go ahead and do this. Oh, I can just split the screen. Yeah, we can just do that. And if you don't know how to create a table, I did a video on that. You can find the link to that video in the description box, or you can find the link to the full series in the description box below. So in this video, I want to show you guys how to use a foreign key, and how to use, and also want to introduce a composite primary key. So the table that we'll be creating today, it's our marks table. So let's just go ahead and write our statement, the create table, and we'll be creating the marks table. And this is our table here, and these are the columns that we'll be creating. Let me just copy that and do this. And I'm just gonna declare these and give them the right data types. And if you're not familiar with the data types, we did go through data types in our series. You can find that link in our series. So one thing that I want to make aware of is we are doing a foreign key today. So as I said in the previous video, a foreign key ensures that there's a link between two tables and that link is not destroyed. So what we're trying to do today is we're trying to link one of the columns from our marks table to one of the columns that we created in our previous tables. And the column that we are linking to must be a primary key in that table that we are referencing to. We want to reference the student ID with the student ID column that it's in the students table, and you can see that that column, it's the primary key in this table. And we also want to reference the module ID with the module ID from the modules table, and you can see that also that column, it's a primary key in this table. So what a foreign key does is, imagine if you are entering marks, right? You are entering this data, and you have your student key, your student ID as your foreign key, and your module ID as a foreign key. So at any given time, should you try to insert a row, maybe let's say you're trying to insert the first row, but you specify a student ID that does not exist in your students table, it will throw an error and say, I can't link that student ID with any row from your reference table. And or should you try to insert a module that does not exist in the module ID, that foreign key constraint will throw you an error and say you are trying to insert a row that has a module ID that does not exist in our modules table. That's what we use a foreign key for. So it always ensures that you are entering the correct data. So imagine a point in time where you're trying to insert maybe a module ID of, let's say you had a module ID of 1, 2, 3 in your table. So since in your modules table you don't have any modules ID of 1, 2, 3, 4, it should give an error and say you are trying to give me data with a module ID that does not exist in my modules table. I hope that makes any sense. So let's just go through this. And these are the columns that we are going to create. Our assessment, we have the mark, and our GPA point. So going back, and just want to give this the data types. So this student ID will reference a student ID in our students table, so which is this column. So what you do is you give it a data type of voucher, you give your size, and since this is going to be a foreign key, this is how you reference a foreign key. Then you say foreign key, and you say references. Then you specify the table that it references. In this case, our student ID must reference the student ID from our students table. And always make sure that you're referencing a primary key, or else it will not go through. So we're referencing, so it says references, then you specify the table that you're referencing. So in this case, it's our students, and you open your bracket and you specify the column that you are referencing in that table. So in this case, we are referencing our student ID. So that's how you reference a foreign key. So same as with our modules, or module ID. So we want to reference this module ID from our modules table. So you just give it a data type, just give it a voucher of a size 100, and you say foreign key and you say references. Then you specify the table that you want to reference. So in this case, we're referencing our modules table. You open brackets and specify the column that you are referencing in that table. So this one, it's our module ID. So this is not the only way to declare a foreign key. There's other ways that you can go and try. I just find this way as the most simple, or the most optimal or minimal way of doing it. You can still find out other ways of doing the same very procedure. And now we are going to give our assessment data types as well. So assessment. So if you look here, assessment just describe what kind of exercise that was. It might have been a test 1, a test 2, an exam, or a lab, or whatever it is that you were doing. So let's just give that a data type of voucher of 100, and I also don't want that to be null, so I'll say not null. Go to the next one, and our mark is actually a tiny int, because our mark is going to go from 0 to 100. And if you've seen our data types video, you've noticed that it falls under the limit of a tiny int data type. So we can make it a tiny int, or you can make it an integer. It will still go through, or big int, whatever, but the best data type for this scenario, it's a tiny int. And I also want that to not be null. And our GPA point, and if you look at our GPA point here, it has decimal, so I'm just going to declare this as decimal, and let's just say 8.2. I'm just saying 8.2 because I find that is the sweet spot for most people. Same as how I put the 100 here. I don't really have to put in 100, but 100 is the sweet spot for most people when it comes to vouchers. So technically, you can just put the size that is appropriate to your column at that moment in time. So now we created our foreign keys, and as I said, I want to show you guys how to create a composite primary key. So if you look at this table, there's no column that you can say I could use this column as a unique identifier. So if you look at the student ID here, this student ID is specified more than once. Same as this one and that one. You can see this one, I have it here. So if I declare this a primary key, it will throw me an error when I try to insert this row, because it already exists because this student ID already exists for this row here. Same as the module ID, I can't declare that as a primary key, because remember, a primary key is something that does not repeat. It's unique throughout your data, and it cannot be null. And also you can use the assessment or the mark or the GPA. So one thing that you could do is you could use multiple columns, and I've said this before in the previous videos. You could use multiple columns as your unique identifier or as your primary key. So in this case, we are going to be using 3 columns, which is our student ID, the module ID, and the assessment, because the application is, I don't want something that has these 3 columns, the same values of these 3 columns repeating or occurring more than once. So I only want one student ID of ST 2023-001 of DSW-001 test 1. I want that specific occurrence only once in my table, so it will only have 1 mark. I don't want to have this again somewhere where it has a different mark. So what you do is you go to your table and you say primary key, and you specify those columns. You open your bracket and specify those columns in your primary key where you'll be declaring your composite primary key. So in this case, we are using our student ID. So I'm just going to copy that. And we'll be using our module ID. And paste that there. And our assessment. And we paste that there. So this is how you declare your composite primary key. And this is how you actually declare your foreign keys. So I'm just going to execute the script, and you can see that commands completed successfully. And now we'll be entering our data into this table. So I can just, I want to minimize that and maximize this. And I've already written scripts for inserting just to save us time. So I'm just going to copy these scripts and paste them in here. The best invention by mankind. So these are the data that we'll be inserting today. So let me just go ahead and write our insert statement, our table name, which is marks, and we'll be inserting the student ID, and not the module ID. And assessment. This is why I love copy and paste, because it's just easy and straightforward. And your GPA, and then you just go put values. I can actually put values here at the end, or I can just put it at the beginning of this first row. So it's much easier if I just put it here. And let's get rid of that. You can see there's some errors here. Let's get rid of that. So this is all the data that we'll be inserting, because I'm going to be inserting this as groups. I'm going to insert this group first, and this, and so on and so on. So let me just copy this statement here and put it in all of these groups at the bottom. So values, same as here. Set values there. We missed our single quotes there. Quickly fix that. We'll do the same here and just say values, and the same as well here. Values. So we're done. So I'm going to insert the first group here. Let's just highlight that. So always remember that you have to select, or you have to highlight the code that you want to execute if you're writing all your code in the same window, or if you're not writing, or if you don't want to write this in the same window. What you could do is you can just go and open another window and write different codes in different windows, so that when you execute without highlighting it, execute all the code in that window. So if you execute here without highlighting a code, you execute everything in this window. But I only want to execute this code. I'm just going to highlight that and execute that, and it gives me an error saying I specified there are fewer columns in the insert statement than values specified in the work class. So in the values class, so we experienced this error in one of the videos, or a feedback in one of the videos that we went through. So a way to fix that. It's just telling me that I have more columns than what I have in our between our mappings. So what we're going to do is we look at our student ID, it's there, module ID, it's there, our assessment, it's there. This is our assessment. So now you can see that we have our GPA, but we missed our mark here. So what we do there is, so I'm thinking this is going to apply to all of this since we copied and pasted. Put our mark there to avoid the errors when we insert the other groups as well. Let's put that there. And we're done. So let's just go ahead and execute that. So you can see that 5 rows affected, means 5 rows were inserted because we're dealing with an insert statement. And let's just go and read from our marks table. Just do that. And now you can see that this is the data we have in our marks table. These are the 5 rows that we inserted. And if I just refresh our tables here, you can see that our marks table here, it does reflect. And if we go and say columns, these are the columns that we created. And you can see that we have our primary key that it's made up of the student ID, and it's made up of the modules ID and assessment ID, and also they have a foreign key, and the module ID also has a foreign key. So you can just go to keys to see a better overview of the keys that you have in your table. And if you look at this, these tables or these columns, these 3 columns here, or just the 2 here, when I was creating these 2, I didn't give them a not null constraint. But here in your table, in your table, it shows that these are columns of not null, and that is because we initiated them as part of the primary key, or as part of the composite primary key. So values of the composite key cannot hold a null value. Oh, sorry, columns of a part of a composite key cannot hold a null value. So that's what went and happened here. So this is the table that we created. These are our columns, and these are our keys in the table, and they reference the modules and the students table. So this is the first row, or the first group that we inserted. And to show you an example of what a foreign key does, like I said, if I try to insert a column that has a foreign key referencing to a table, and I insert a value that does not exist in the reference table, it should give me an error and say, hey, you're trying to give me a student ID that does not exist in my students table. For an example, I don't have a student ID of ST1. So now if I go and try to insert this value, let's just try and insert that row. So you can see that it gave me a feedback on an error here, said the insert statement conflicted with a foreign key constraint, and it gives me the name of the foreign key. And it said the conflict occurred in the database fundamentals, that's the name of the database, the table, and your column name, which is the student ID. So right now it's just trying to tell me that you're trying to insert a student ID that does not exist in your reference table, which is your students, and for the column of student ID, which is true because I don't have a student ID of ST1. If we can just go back and see our students table, these are all the students that we have in our student table, and we don't have a student ID of ST1. Same as our module ID, since we have a foreign key on our module ID. So I'm just going to go back and put the correct student ID there. And I don't have a module ID of MD1. Same as if I try that with the module ID of that and say, let me execute that. And tells me the very same error, but this time it says it's the F key marks module ID, which is a different name of a foreign key here. And conflicted in a database gives you the database where it occurred. And then the table that is referenced this time, it's our modules table and not our students table. And the column, which is our module ID, not the students ID, because this occurred in that table for that column. And which is true, because if I go to my modules table, I do not have a module ID of MD1. So that's what a foreign key does. If you try to insert data that does not exist in the referenced table, it will give you an error and say, you are trying to give me data that does not exist in your table that you referenced for your foreign key. So that means if I were trying to enter this and trying to enter a funny module ID or trying to enter a funny student ID that I do not have, it will not go through. It will give me an error and say, your foreign key has been violated. Go back and check your data. So I'm just going to put everything back and let's insert our second batch here. The insert conflicted with the foreign key. So now I'm getting this error here. It's telling me that I'm trying to insert a module ID that does not exist. So let's see what is the error in our module ID. We have that for second year, third year. I don't think we have an IFS 004. Let's just go here and make sure of that. This is our module IDs and our IFSs are here. So it's 001, 002, 003. So yeah, we do not have a 004. So this is what a foreign key actually does. So this was not on purpose. I did not notice that I had a 004 there. So imagine if you didn't have that foreign key, your data was going to go through. So you have a data that consists of a module ID that does not exist in your DB. So let's just go ahead and see which year the student it's doing, the student of 2021. So if we go to our table here, our DB, we can actually search that in our database as well, but I just want to reference that here. So it is that student, it's third year, so that module will be 003. So we can just go back here and set, instead of 4, and say 003, and let's just insert our data. You can see that 7 rows affected or 7 rows inserted. So now I'm going to show you the part of the composite primary key of this. So let me insert this data as well. Insert that one. Oh, was this the... Oh, this is the same error as well. I don't have 4th year modules. I only have 3rd year modules. Let's just cancel that and put 3. Let's execute. The 7 rows went through. So now, what I'm gonna do is, if I try and insert this row again, it should give me an error and tell me that I'm violating a primary key. Reason being, I already have the student ID for this module, for this practical. So if I try and do that and try to execute that, you can see here it told me that I violated a primary key constraint. That is because I have a composite primary key, and here you can see the values is telling me that it's of that student ID for that module and for that assessment. So I don't want to have those 3 occurring more than once. Just to give an example, if I change this, let me just say test assessment, and I try to insert that. Now it should go through, since I do not have any record of this student for this module and for this specific assessment. So you can see that now one row was affected, or one row was inserted. So let's just go ahead and insert the rest of this data. But before we do that, let me just look at our table, what we have so far. It's our marks table. This is all the data that we have so far. Let's insert the second last batch. A violation of a primary key. Oh, I think I've already inserted this. Yeah, I've already inserted this. So I'm just going to insert this. And then the last one here. Cool. So now let's just read from our table, the marks table. And this is all the data that we have for our marks. This is all the data that we have for our marks. And if you look here, all the student IDs that we have in here, they do exist in our students table. And all the module ID that we have here, they do exist in our modules table. So that's what a foreign key does. It prevents you from entering funny data that does not exist in your main tables. So that was it for today's video. I'll see you guys in the next video, where I believe we'll be doing our where class. And if you've watched this far, don't forget to subscribe, hit that like button. I'll see you guys in the next videos. So cheers.